Courtrooms can be places of high drama where guilt or innocence, imprisonment or freedom hang in the balance. The recent courtroom scenes, they're gripping the attention of many in our nation. In the history of television, courtroom dramas go back to the very first days of TV. You all remember, well, not all of you, but most of you remember Perry Mason. Right up to the current seasons of Law and Order. Well, today, the last Sunday in our liturgical year, we have a very imaginative courtroom scene. This is a parable that is unique to the Gospel of Matthew. Next Sunday begins Advent, and this parable suggests the kind of behavior that must engage us disciples as we await Jesus' glorious return. A month ago, we heard Jesus sum up our responsibility as disciples of Christ, to love God with all our heart, soul, and mind, and to love our neighbor as ourself. This, he said, sums up the whole law and the prophets. That's first century code. It means the entire Old Testament. So Jesus instructs us that if we want to love and serve a God who we cannot see, then we must love and serve the neighbor who we can see. Today, Jesus continues and reaffirms this message that he is to be found among the poor and the suffering, and he continues to suffer with them. And since this is Jesus' final teaching, it's like he's giving us his last will and testament. When judgment is passed, it will be based, Jesus tells us, on how we showed our love for those in need. That's the whole point of this parable. This love isn't expressed just in words. It takes concrete actions. Jesus, the judge, highlights just a few examples of those who should be recipients of his disciples' care and devotion and concern. Christians are not just a group who share a common belief system or a liturgical practice or religious vocabulary. We are also called to express our belief through concrete acts of those who need, not only those people in physical sight, but also those who are close enough to us through the modern media of television and newspapers and the internet. If we clothe the naked, feed the hungry, visit the sick and imprisoned today, what will we do tomorrow and next week when they're again hungry or thirsty or naked or sick and imprisoned? Our immediate response to their needs is important, but more is required of us disciples, whom hopefully the Master, like we heard last week, calls us good and faithful servants. Faithful servants, I would remind you, don't give up after initial attempts to help the most needy and vulnerable. We keep on keeping on. And the really clever disciples, whom Jesus praises throughout the entire gospel, will continue to address the poor's ongoing needs by organizing others into their charitable projects. So in many parishes, there's all kinds of helping hands for food pantries, clothing drives, prison and jail visitation, but still so much more is needed. The needs of the poor, sick, prisoners, they're often much greater than the volunteers or ministerial staff can address. Still more is needed, and that's why some who hear today's parable address the problem through community and state and national programs. This is one of the reasons why we have that giving tree this time of the year. And the Giving Tuesday, the day after tomorrow. It's all to address that very large need that the Lord directs us to help control. And then there are people who, in response to the scriptures, keep an eye out for legislation to help the poor when it comes up for discussion and votes. And those of us linked to the internet, we have access to charitable organizations that can keep us current about legislative issues that affect the poor. We informed Christians make sure that our voices are heard on behalf of the poor and the least influential. Because we know that we cannot overlook the ones whom Jesus has identified as being the least. We certainly must address the needs of those at our doorstep and our local community, but we can't be so nearsighted. We can't claim ignorance to the desperate needs of the poor and disenfranchised who are throughout our whole globalized world. I'll give you an example. Last month, Pope Francis sent out a message which invited church leaders and politicians to propose paths for safe legal migration for all people who are on the move. Our North American bishops have also spoken out and said that our current system in this is broken and needs reform. And while recognizing the need for a nation to protect its borders, our bishops have also called for a path to protect and provide for the disenfranchised who live and work in the bleak shadows of our nation. Our church has taken this position because all human welfare and rights are a part of our responsibility. And they're affected by this issue. Did you hear out of that gospel? Jesus tells us flat out that we, as his disciples, we are to care for today's hungry and thirsty, naked, ill, imprisoned, and the strangers in a strange land right here in Coxsackie, right here in Greene County, in New York, and my friends throughout this entire planet.